Hello, my friends. It's me, Claire, and this is part 5 of Steal My Art, your step-by-step tutorial on how to forge my painting Lucrezia Claro. This is video 5 out of the 6-part lesson. You can find the final video and the previous videos on patreon.com/Klaire Lockheart because these lessons are part of the curriculum at the Unaccredited College of Klaire. So if you need to go back to any of the previous videos, just head on over to patreon.com/Klaire Lockheart. For part 5, you're going to paint everything. Since you're painting everything, you'll notice some dramatic changes on your composition. But before you get started, I want to reassure you that painting everything isn't as difficult as it sounds. For part 4, you added a new layer of paint over the entire surface of your canvas. You're going to basically repeat that process, and the more you paint, the easier it gets. For this new layer of paint, you're going to do some more work in the background. You'll be able to add some more shadows, and you want to keep that paint flat so that way it appears to recede and be behind the subject. When you paint the face and the neck, the eyes and the mouth, you're going to be able to correct the colors a little bit more, add more of those shadows, and the longer you work on this, the more details you'll be able to add. With the new layers of paint, you'll be making your paint kind of see-through, and that helps you with the blending process to help get the textures of the skin more accurate. When you paint the clothes, you'll notice in the differences between my before and after for part 5, the clothing is a lot darker. I tend to put my first layers of paint a lot lighter, knowing that I do a lot of layers of paint, and I can add those shadows over the top of the previous layers. So the clothing is getting darker. Even the veil is getting darker, and you'll notice that I was able to smooth out some of those textures in the fabric. The hair has a pretty big change in it as well. Last time I used a lot of titanium white to create those highlights, which was a bit over dramatic, but I was able to tone that down and make the hair look even more realistic. I'll guide you through all of these steps and show you my process through those time-lapse videos, and I'll explain what I did so that way you'll have smaller, more manageable parts to tackle. Since you're painting everything, once again, you'll need everything. So make sure you have some time set aside to work. Please remember to wear your gloves when you paint so that way you're staying safe and healthy. But you'll need your painting, your reference image, your palette, all your paints, your cleaning supplies, and so forth. You'll notice on my palette I have my paint set up, and I go from white on the left, and then I follow the color spectrum, so red, then yellows, then I have the green, blues, brown, because I don't need violet for this particular painting, so I don't have any on my palette. I also have my light, medium, and dark skin tones ready to go, plus my warm black and cool black. I try to make sure that I keep my palette clean and organized, and between each of the smaller steps I show you, I do scrape off my palette with that paint scraper so that way I'm not contaminating my paint and I have a chance to stay organized. To paint the background this time, I have a range of grays on my palette. I am using light and medium gray plus black, which is a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Remember, when making gray, start with white and gradually add the black. That way you'll have more control over what you're mixing and you won't waste so much paint. I am going to use a lot of the medium in this layer in order to make my paint see-through. This translucent layer will help develop and deepen the shadows. I'm paying careful attention to make my shadows dark enough, and I'm also cognizant of my brush strokes to make the ripples in the fabric. If at any time you add paint to your canvas and don't like it, remember, you can use a rag to gently wipe the paint off the surface of your canvas. I am trying to keep my backdrop as flat as possible to help it recede into the background and add to the illusion of depth. Some of the areas on your background might already be done and won't need additional paint. There are spots of the backdrop that show through the veil, and so I painted a little bit of the gray in those areas. I want to mention that you can't use Gelkid Light as a varnish, but if my paint on the canvas is dry and the gloss disappeared, I will use a little bit of the Gelkid Light directly on the painting to bring back that shine. You will need to wait 6 months to a year to varnish an oil painting. That way you have a lot of time and you can allow the paint to completely dry. The paint you add to the face at this stage is going to be the most challenging part of the process, but this is when everything will truly come together and you'll notice that your hard work is paying off. You've already invested so much time and money into this project, and you'll be happy to see your effort manifest into something spectacular. I spent about an hour working on the face for this step, but you will need to work at your own pace. You'll notice a big leap in your portrait this time. Because I have those lighter layers of color as the base of the face, I can mix more Gelkid Light with skin tones now. I just pour a little bit of Gelkid Light into a small container and then add a few drops of Gamasol to it to make it a consistency that helps my paint flow easily on my canvas. This mixture will make the paint more see-through and it will help smooth out those blocky colors from earlier. But remember, only mix small amounts of medium with the paint as you need it. I use more of the mid-range skin colors with the Gelkid Light to glaze over my previous work. Glazing just means that you combine the paint with a medium, such as Gelkid Light, to make the paint translucent. Think of the glaze on a donut. The glaze modifies the color of the donut, but you can still see the delicious pastry through the glaze. You'll notice that I frequently consult my reference when I work, and that's what helps me paint accurately. Whether I paint from a photo that I create or with a live model, I spend a huge amount of time looking and observing. This helps me paint what I see, not what I think I see. Since I'm glazing see-through layers of paint over what I have already done, I am able to get more dramatic with my shadows. I desaturate my skin colors, which means I make them darker and duller. Typically, you blend in a complementary color to desaturate the first color. The skin tone is a type of orange since I use yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, and cadmium red to start the colors. I also added in burnt umber and burnt sienna, but overall the skin mix is orange. Since the skin color is a type of orange, and blue is the opposite of orange on the color wheel, I use ultramarine blue for my shadows on skin. I like to mix the blue into the darkest skin color to achieve these dramatic shadows. When I paint the neck and upper rib cage, I make sure that I move my brush horizontally so it conforms to the structures of the skeletal system and makes the subject look three-dimensional. I hope these demonstrations are helping you see exactly what I did, so you can apply these techniques to your own canvas. Now, it really cracks me up to think of future art historians getting their hands on your painting a few hundred years in the future, because they are going to have a heck of a time trying to figure out how you were able to match the layers of paint just like I did in the original. They'll probably hypothesize that you are one of the greatest art forgers on the planet, and they'll wonder what other paintings you replicated. Either that, or they might think we were best friends and painted side by side. Who knows? Either way, I will do my best to get famous, so that way your forgery will be valuable, and we can prank a fancy art auction house in the future. Each layer you paint will get better and better, but one of the tricky parts with painting is trusting that it will turn out in the end. My first layers of the clothing were very light and blocky, but now that all the canvas is covered, I can really work on improving the colors and get everything dark enough. For the chemise, I painted a layer of cool black combined with a lot of medium over the entire surface, and then I took a little bit of gray and painted it in the areas that had highlights. I did something similar for the corset too, and while the paint was still wet, I blended the paint together to create that smooth texture. I like to put the main colors on my canvas, but while the paint is still wet, I will softly wiggle my paintbrush to blend the colors together directly on the canvas. Since the hair and the veil take turns overlapping each other, I chose to work on both concurrently. If you want to work on these sections together, I recommend making sure you'll have about an hour of uninterrupted work time. If you do have to take a break, remember that you can cover your paint with plastic wrap so it will keep longer than leaving it exposed to air. I want my paint to be quite translucent in this layer, and so I use a lot of medium. The medium also helps my paint dry faster, but it is important to make sure the layer you're painting over is dry. Usually a day or two between layers is good enough for painting with this technique. When I began painting the veil, I started with pretty much a light, medium, and dark. Now, I am still using that same concept, but I am able to blend those harsh contrasts together directly on my canvas when the paint is still wet to create those intermediate colors. Please remember to wear your gloves while you're working and make sure that you have adequate ventilation. Because I am creating these translucent layers of paint, I can really get the hair darker. I put in the darkest areas first because I have an easier time seeing and matching the shadows. After creating the shadows, I kind of painted almost all the hair with a see-through glaze of black. While the paint is still wet, I added the lighter areas of just brown or yellow ochre. I also added in the flyaway strands of hair by lightly painting with an angle brush. You can get pretty thin lines with an angle brush if you hold it just right. The trick to painting these little strands of hair is to not paint them perfectly. Let the paint break so it's not a solid line. Don't forget to step back from your canvas periodically so you can see it from a distance. Most of your audience will see your final portrait from across the room, or they'll see a photo of it on a tiny screen. You'll want to check to see what your viewers will see when they look at your forgery. I know that the direction of paint everything can be a little overwhelming, but you have a lot of experience painting already, and you also have practice breaking down these bigger chunks of directions into smaller, more manageable pieces. So in the past, you've typically painted the background, and then I showed you how to paint the skin, and then I showed you how to paint the clothing and the hair. You know your schedule and your painting style better than I do, and so you'll be able to insert those breaks as you need them. Please feel free, of course, to go back and re-watch parts of the video if you need a refresher, if you don't have time to do all the painting in one session. That's completely okay. At this point, though, your painting will almost look complete. Remember to paint the background to the foreground, so you do the subject at the end. That way, Lucrezia Claro looks like she is sitting in front of that backdrop. It's okay to blend your paint at this point. You are glazing, so you have those see-through layers of paint, and you can mix them together right on the surface of your canvas. However, don't blend the hair. You want that texture to look very different from the fabric and the skin. As you're working, you'll also finally be able to start adding in those little details. You don't have much more painting to do after completing part 5. On that note, you're almost there. You're almost done with your forgery of Lucrezia Claro. I can't wait to see you finish this project. As soon as you're finished with part 5, head on over to patreon.com/Klaire Lockheart. You'll find part 6 of Steal My Art as part of the curriculum of the Unaccredited College of Klaire. So as soon as you're ready to finish up this painting, please go to patreon.com/Klaire Lockheart.